Okay, I think the meeting should have just gone live. We will just kind of wait a couple of minutes, just let other people, that are wrapping up current meetings and what have you, get themselves sorted and get logged on. And then we will get started on what I hope is going to be a interesting and stimulating and thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, I think it will, Chris.
It's definitely the end of the summer, isn't it? To go and find my hoodies again for the first time in quite a few weeks.
Sitting in London in shorts and t-shirt.
Huh? It's cold. It's cold in the north, right? We're guarding the wall. What do you
So
think,
while we're
Jamie?
waiting to start in a couple of minutes, I'm just reflecting. One of my good friends and colleagues went into hospital last night. And Chris, where we were talking about kind of mental health over the last couple of webinars. And for anyone watching this back, you can always go back and watch those. But, we've had some really interesting conversations about how mental health can affect physical health. This poor chap who ended up in hospital last night, it is very much stress related that's led him to that situation. And certainly last night when I was thinking about this webinar and the ones we've done previously, how that kind of influence of mental health and physical health is so there and present. This poor chap in hospital, I spoke to him, it's like, oh yeah, stress and mental health and well-being. It's like, wow. And we kind of forget sometimes. We just look at it and we're fit and active people, those of us that are able to run around and do those things, and suddenly you're in hospital. That was a sobering moment for me.
I'm sorry to hear that, Jamie.
Yeah. But it just made me reflect on the conversations we've previously had, and I'm going to go back and watch a couple of them.
Yeah. That connection, you know enough about me, Jamie. That connection between our emotional health and our state of mind and our physical health. And actually it works both ways. I think that's an interesting thing that I've discovered, this whole kind of like somatic sense of stored trauma and things, right? Within our bodies, our physical bodies retain memories of at a very simple level, that tightness across the back of your shoulders.
That's right.
That then creates the headache is actually your body storing memory of some mental and emotional trauma as well.
Yeah.
These things are so interconnected, and we have a sort of medical system that tries to isolate them and separate them and say, no, your mind is your mind and your body is your body, and it's
and it's not. But for those watching
and
play back later, it's if you're interested in those conversations Chris and I've had in the past, then please do feel free to look at Equal Engineers and watch them back. But should we get going, Chris?
Yeah, okay, right, okay, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, that should be a blank slide just to get started. Okay, I think I'm back.
Yeah, you're back.
Jamie,
I
think I just disappeared for a moment, yeah?
Yeah, right, you're with us.
Apologies for that, everybody. Yeah, so it's in recognition of the day. Today is Suicide Prevention Day. We are going to be touching on the topic of suicide. Today isn't about suicide, but you will see, as for those people that kind of stick with the conversation, we will touch on it as a topic and will be informed by it. So that for some people can be really difficult. We want to just give people fair warning that there will be mentions of suicide at various points during the course of the day. It isn't the primary topic of the day. The primary topic of the day is to talk about connection and how we connect with one another, but it is going to come up in conversation. But we're going to sort of work through, hopefully, an interesting conversation really about the power of talking and connection and why it matters, when it works, when perhaps sometimes it doesn't work. And then Jamie has kind of very courageously offered to talk about a very personal experience for him and a team that he worked with where the power of talking and connection was really powerful. And then there'll be a little bit of a discussion about where to get help, where to get support, or where to guide other people to for support or connection or talk when, if that may be necessary. But before we get too carried away, let's kind of maybe just introduce ourselves. I'm going to be kind of sort of chairing today. Jamie's done that in previous conversations. For my part, I'm a chemical engineer by original background, still a fellow of the IChemE, fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering as well. Done all sorts of things in process manufacturing, but now work in a really small enterprise with my wife, where we're really focused on trying to help engineers and engineering to be a much greater power for good in the world. Is probably the simplest way to putting it. Jamie, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I'm Jamie. I've got two roles. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the International Marine Contractors Association, and we're a trade association for all offshore marine industries, so offshore wind or oil and gas, deep sea diving and things like that. But I'm here in my capacity as a individual, as a director of Intura, and I do work on cultural change, particularly around mental health, well-being, allyship, and safety. So I'm speaking not on behalf of IMCA today, but as myself with the Intura and Equal Engineers as a co-chair. I've got 30 years of engineering experience, started as an aircraft engineer, but I've done manufacturing, I've done marine, I've done leisure, I've done infrastructure, and I say I'm back in marine, so it's nice to be here.
Excellent, thanks, Jamie. Jamie, can I just check, because I know my connection crashed for a minute. Are you still seeing the slides, or are you seeing? Yeah, great. Okay, that's good. Good. Okay, so let's kind of jump in. First up, just want to acknowledge the day and acknowledge the significance of the topic we're talking about with reference to today. Today is World Suicide Prevention Day. I think this has been running for several years now. One of the primary objectives around World Suicide Prevention Day is to try and shift our culture towards, suicide has been something that's been stigmatized, not talked about. It's been something that people have committed, right? Rather than something that people die by, right? So we're trying to the purpose of World Suicide Prevention Day is to try and shift the culture to one of understanding, support, and openness, so that, I guess, those of us who are in a position can help and support and provide people at a time of need, and we will all have times of need in our lives. But equally, it's easier for those people that do need support to go out and find it. It's a particular issue for Jamie and I and the Men's Network, because the statistics vary depending on how you classification, but somewhere between 65% and 75% of all deaths by suicide happen to men. It's disproportionate, and it's the single biggest cause of death for men under 50. I mean, those are statistics you've heard us talk about in other times in other places, but it's a big issue for men. That's not to say it's a universally male problem, but it's a big issue for men. That said, the interesting statistic that I discovered just recently is, despite the prevalence, if you like, and the propensity for men, and despite the clear evidence that talking therapies are really powerful in terms of addressing some of the underlying causes, what we see when we look at NHS statistics is only 36% of referrals for talking therapies come from men. So we see evidence of much more significant impact for men, but much lower uptake of the things that can make a difference in a therapeutic sense. And I think anecdotally, we're all very much aware of the fact that there is much more, men tend to be more isolated, more loners, more lone wolf than typically women are. And I acknowledge I'm making huge, grotesque generalizations around gender here, but the statistics are what they are. So
yeah, I think you're right, Chris. You mentioned kind of a little bit of stereotyping, but there's a lot of data out there to support what you've just said. So whilst people might think we're being stereotyping, I think it's a very clear story that we are looking at data showing how lonely men are, despite the connections we have at work or social media we'll talk about later. So yeah, there's a lot out there to back up what you've just said.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then so to just bridge from the fact, talking therapies are really powerful. They are demonstrated to be effective and to work in a huge, in a very significant number of cases. But we don't have to rely on talking therapy, the whole thing about talking in connection, which is really what we wanted to explore a little bit today, between Jamie and myself, and encourage, actually I should say, encourage contribution from people in the audience. Ideally put questions in the Q&A, but if you can't see it, Teams is a bit glitchy around that. The chat is available as well. We'll be trying to monitor both through the course of the thing, but ideally put it in Q&A, but use chat if you need to as well. And we'll keep track of that as we go. But I just really wanted to kind of start, Jamie, by sort of what's your experience of good examples of talking connected that you've seen in the workplace and elsewhere?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think to sort of put it into context, we're talking here as engineers. We're just trying to be relatable engineers talking about how we look after people, not coming at this from a kind of HR theme. I'm not getting into psychology of human connections. This is just how we as authentic people, when you walk into a workplace, be it a manufacturing site or a building site or a engineering office, it's just who we are. We're just people. We're just talking to each other. And I think that authenticity is really important in what we do. If I look at what worked in previous organizations that I've been in, it's not about being this sort of super amazing, accessible person that I walk in and goes, oh, you know what, I'm going to tell you all my problems. That's great. It's just being authentic, having a chat. It might be about rugby or Formula One. It might be about beer or books or art or whatever people are into. It's not trying to be all things to all people. It's not trying to fix everybody's problems on day one. It's just remembering to make that connection, have a chat, much like you and I do, Chris, when we connect. First half of any meeting we have, we're just talking about where you went on holiday or how you're getting on. And you just get to learn your people. You get to learn how you respond. And if I then meet you the next time and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, you don't seem like yourself today, I'll know that because I've spent time talking about, I don't know, beer or holidays or retreats.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, for me, it's all about just being yourself, just being a normal person for your team, having those connections. There is an element of that as a leader, particularly a manager, it's being a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more open rather than standoffish saying, right, I'm going to be the boss. You not over there do what you like. It's actually, I've got problems too. We've talked about that in previous webinars of things that don't always go well. And if I'm happy to be open and talk about, well, I did enjoy the rugby, but actually it's having a bit of a bad weekend and here's why. It's not trying to solve problems. It's not trying to be that kind of big person who can come in and fix it. It's just, what, we're all human together. What that does over time, I found that we've built that connection, we've built that kind of network around us. The day it counts, we'll come back to this later, it really matters. You've already done the hard work and the groundwork. So for me, the experience is not trying to fix it, not trying to come from some sort of HR perspective necessarily. Just be human. Just remember to say, hi, Chris, how are you today? Are you all right? And start with that, humanizing what we do, I think is really important.
I think that's right. I mean, I would echo that. And I think, you make a really important point that as leaders, it's a time to come down and be one of the people, right? Particularly in this area, there are times when you have to be strong, you have to be separate, you have to be somewhat distant, right? But in this context, it is actually leading by example, and that means coming down to everybody else's level, right? People can only be what they can see, right? And as leaders, we need to act as examples of that.
Yeah.
And I think it reminds me of one of the most amazing workplaces I've ever experienced was one. It was a manufacturing site in the northwest of England. I won't go any more into detail for fear of naming or identifying individuals, but it was I'm going to say it was exclusively male. It was certainly predominantly male because it was a process manufacturing site. And one thing that they did that they became almost famous for is they used to have their own internal bake-off competition. And so they had, I forget what it was, let's say it was the second Wednesday of the month, right, would be bake-off day. And people who wanted to would bake an experimental cake, and boy, there were some experimental cakes. There were some really, really. Imagine you get a bunch of chemical engineers baking cakes. This was, you know, and bring them in, and there would be a competition. But it wasn't only the people that baked. You know, everybody, the whole workforce was invited. By the end, anyway, it became quite a big thing. You know, the whole workforce was invited to come and try the cakes. It was a bit like a WI. Well, in fact, we've got the local village leek show this weekend, where everybody, we go down and try all the apple pies and the whatever chutneys, right? It was the same thing, same deal. The whole workforce was invited to go and try the cakes and try some of these kind of weird concoctions and experiments. And it was a phenomenal thing, right? Now, I wasn't part of that organization. I actually was a sort of sales consultant working with them. And we got to a point where we would try to contrive a reason to go and visit the site on the day we knew was Bake Off Day, so we could go and actually participate in this thing. And it was an extraordinary, it was such a nice example for me of what can be done relatively straightforwardly in a workplace. Now, yeah, okay, it's different places have different requirements and different needs, but that ability to connect outside of work, have a bit of fun, have a bit of a laugh in a way that was one of the nice things about it is it wasn't exclusive. It wasn't only for the people that drank or the people that could go to the pub or for the people that were whatever, right? It was accessible to anybody. I guess if you were, in fact, I was going to say, I guess if you were gluten intolerant, it might not have been a great thing. But actually, I do recall that one of the engineers themselves had celiacs, and therefore there was always a gluten-free option, not out of some sense of political correctness, but just being human, right?
Yeah.
And it was an extraordinary thing. I mean, I loved that. And it's just so powerful, so powerful.
And
Was
I
I
guess,
kind of
Chris,
yeah,
what that does, you touched on it, but you're there with a shared value of, eating cake, and I would never turn down cake. But actually, it's the conversations that follow that I think the value of why you're there is, you talk about a cake for a while, but actually everything else comes from there. I
Yeah.
really like that.
Yeah. But I've sort of touched a little bit. I think, Jamie, you and I have talked about this, and we've referenced it in previous webinars as well, that talking and connection is really important, but it can go wrong, right? And particularly it can go wrong in a masculine male context and setting. One thing that I had never really I kind of grew up in a culture, in a sales culture that was very much about drinking and entertainment and corporate hospitality. I never really kind of properly stopped to think about what that implied, because it was such a great place to be, right? It was great, go out for a few beers and a curry or whatever, go out for meals with clients and with colleagues. It was phenomenal. And just the awareness actually, though, but that becomes quite exclusionary for people that, for all sorts of reasons, don't want to be in a social context, can't deal with the environment of a bar and that sort of work. Maybe alcohol is problematic from a religious point of view. The obvious ones around children and families and being carers, and actually an ability to be socializing out of the formal work context. I think one thing that I've tried to be much more aware of is the things that we do that are good for the people we do them with, to make sure that they don't become exclusionary or exclude. I don't know, my English has disappeared, my grammar, whatever the right form of the word exclude is in this context, right? That they don't exclude others by virtue of trying to create the connection we want. I mean, Jamie, any reflections on that?
I'm reflecting on what you're saying, that I think you're right. It's all very well saying let's connect, but if it's in an environment where half your group don't want to go, then you've already failed, I guess. And if we're going to have good examples of talking and connecting, and why do we want to do this well, it's making sure it's in an environment where everyone wants to go. So it might not be the pub at the end of the day. It might be something else at lunchtime, or it might be take a bit of time out as the afternoon, do some CPD, and then go and have a bit of a walk around. I don't know. We did a beach clean the other day as a team. That was great fun. And actually, we spent more time chatting about stuff than we ever imagined. So it's a really good point, Chris, of not falling back into some of the stereotypical ways of, let's just go down the pub and have a beer, because half of
I
us don't
guess
want to do that anymore. I like that.
I guess with that though, Jamie, I don't know whether you'd agree, right? We're not trying to say that everything has to be accessible and available to everybody all the time. There's a place for smaller groups to get together to do their thing and engage in the way that they do it. It's just being a little bit careful about that not being the only point of connection. And
it
also,
comes down to what a lot of people talk about, finding your tribe. So you're right, it's not everybody has to go out all the time. If you join a rugby club and you want to go to a rugby club, it's a certain group of people are going to be there.
yeah,
It might be exclusive in some respects, but actually if that's your tribe and that's where you're most comfortable opening up, that's the group you need to be with.
yeah,
And trying to contrive a situation where you're with people you're uncomfortable around, you're not going
yeah,
to be authentic. You're not going to have those conversations. So it is okay to find those moments, whether it's the club or the pub or whatever, where you have your tribe, a music festival, a book festival. Who is your tribe? Where are you going to feel most comfortable having those chats?
yeah.
So yeah,
But
there's a
then
time and a place.
and I guess, but then when that comes into a more general context, also being aware of the appropriateness of some of the norms in that new expanded context, right?
Yeah.
There was somebody I was listening to talk on a call a couple of days ago, only, who was talking about it was an engineering context, in I don't know, I think it was a construction site, but I could be wrong, right? Where a group of guys had gone out to the pub, one lunchtime, having a laugh, having a good bit of crack, good bit of banter, but when they came back into the workplace, they brought some of that back in with them, and it resulted in making some of the other people in that workplace feel extremely uncomfortable about the topic of conversation and the nature of the way certain topics were being discussed. And I'm not trying to be preaching saying those conversations should or shouldn't have been being had, but we do really need to be cautious of bringing norms from one context into another context where other people may be exposed to it or may overhear things, right?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
very fair. Growing up in the military and, first half of my career in the military, some of the places we've operated or things we've done, that banter has been what's carried us through. And you talk about strong
Yeah.
mental health. When you're operating as a crew in a different environment, that camaraderie we built up. Yes, there was some banter. And if I look at it now, 15 years later, it's like, crikey, some of those conversations. But actually, we got through what we got through as a team. We came out of it in a stronger place. Our mental health, we maintained it by having that tribe that we worked with. You're right. We need to remember that, there's a time and a place for that. And actually, you don't bring that to work today. Yeah, it's a good point.
I think that brings us on to this kind of the next area we kind of both sort of recognized we wanted to kind of talk about and acknowledge is the whole kind of role of social media in this, right? Or social media platforms and what have you. I think these tend to get castigated as being bad, yet we all indulge in them probably more than we would like to admit, right? We have this kind of like really tortured relationship with social media, I think. And I think it's actually only through, it's as a father of a young man now, my experience and recognition of the way I see social media and some of these platforms is actually very different from the way other people and other actually experience them. It's a really good example of context, I think, and context getting mixed up. These can be really, really powerful. It came home to me really with going on summer holiday with my son. Just just him, but actually there was also a phone and his girlfriend on holiday with us. And initially, I think I was quite pissed off and quite irritated by it. Right? It's like, pay attention. This is disrespectful. Blah 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 blah. But I actually started to realize, actually, no, this was about connection for him and for them, and it was about really important. It was really important connection. They connect in a different way with different expectations and different norms, right? And these things can be good and they can be bad, right? And we can engage with them in positive and negative ways. But Jamie, your thoughts on this whole area?
Yeah, it's, anything can have good and bad connotations, and I don't want to get drawn into the debate about whether social media is friend or foe, because it's both in some respects. I guess the point is back to what we said about finding your tribe, having a conversation with somebody, if it happens to be a support group that you wouldn't have been talking to otherwise, and you found it through Facebook or WhatsApp or wherever you happen to be, actually having that support group in the background is vital for some people. And it might be the only connections they have. There's plenty of evidence out there that some people, if it wasn't for social media, would be so isolated and so lonely, it'd be tragic. So it is a really important tool for some. We know there are downsides, and there's a lot of talk in the media about, over reliance on social media. You've forgotten to be kind of human with each other. It's just that balance. Like everything in life, it's a balance. And social media is good for connecting. We're more connected to people than ever. How many of them are rich connections? Would you really know what's going on with somebody if they're just a connection there? I still like the fact that you and I, Chris, we phone up and have a chat every now and then, and that human connection is important. So it has a place, and there's a role in it, and we shouldn't just condemn social media as a bad thing. For some people, it's the only connection they've got, and if that's where you're happy and safe, that's where you should have it. A conversation doesn't have to be in person in a pub over a beer. There's so many different ways of doing this.
Absolutely. And even just kind of that occasional, if it maybe even low quality connection, enables a much richer in-person connection when you next get together. Just an awareness of where people are and what they're doing can be really powerful, right? But it can become problematic too. So I think we've just sort of felt we wanted to include the idea of technology and social media in this conversation around talking and connection, and acknowledge that it's both powerful but potentially also problematic. Very problematic in the sense of the context being inappropriate for the topic sometimes, and needing to be aware of who might be listening or who might be aware that we don't otherwise see. So Jamie, I think with that, if you're happy, I'd like to kind of move on to you've got a particular story to tell around building and creating a mental health support group, and then the impact that it had. What I'm going to do, folks, if it's all right, rather than just leave this big banner on the screen in a very start way, I'll stop sharing for a little while so that we can actually engage a little bit more closely. But Jamie, do you just want to sort of start getting into the work you did in terms of setting up this mental health support?
Yeah, it was.
Am I using the right words even?
No, it is. It's right. So when I joined one of my organizations previously, I was looking at the mental health and well-being of a team. It's something I've always done and cared about through my career, but I had an opportunity to put a program in place. The aim of this, I didn't have suicide in mind and some of the things that we'll talk about in a minute. This was purely about making sure the team I worked with were in a good place. They understood their personal responsibility for mental health. And we've talked a little bit about that in previous webinars, where understanding if we can look after ourselves better, we understand sleep and tiredness or fatigue, we understand how to, exercise and feed ourselves, not from a big science point of view, but just basic care. And then talking about who we are, sharing our kind of own mental health journeys, learning from each other. So I would explain some of the things I've been through. They would do the same as a team. We'd all look at it and go, yeah, that's really interesting. So we started it just about improving our mental health, improving our connection as a team, looking after ourselves personally, but then being better at looking after our colleagues. So we'd started this program. We'd put these strong foundations in place where we were comfortable talking to each other. And that's kind of where the journey started.
Okay, and then we've already sort of given a bit of the game away in the way we've talked about it. Then, from what I understand, you had need to really call on some of the strengths you'd built.
Yeah, it was, as so often the case, I think, for so many people who've lost friends and colleagues. It was a shock. It came out of nowhere. But one day one of our colleagues didn't come to work. I was like, okay. Anyone seen or heard from them? And it took a while, and then a little bit of time later we got a phone call, the one we didn't want, saying we found them, and sadly they died. It hit us hard. It's like, did not see that coming, didn't know what was going to happen. It was a real sad moment for us. And as the boss of the team, I was like, where do we start?
I'm sorry. So, Jamie, can you share a little bit with, how did you deal with that, both, I guess you and the wider team?
Yeah, and I was lucky. I mean, I had an amazing team around me. But what I liked about this, and I think it goes back to the foundations we put in place, is we just, as a small team first, those who were most connected, came together. We sat in a room. Whatever we were doing, wherever we were, we just dropped everything, forget work for a minute. We all turned up into a room and we sat in a room. I was like, okay, what do we do now? And it was because we understood a little bit about mental health. We're not experts, we're not all professionals at it. It was just something we'd done a little bit of in the background. We felt okay going around the room saying, you know what, I'm struggling with this, or I don't understand that, or I'm feeling this. And because we trusted each other to share personal feelings before with respect, and we had opened up about our own journeys, but we'd also understood how to look after each other. That moment when we came together, we were sitting in that room, going around the room talking about it. And occasionally work would come up and going, but what about this? It's like, okay, well, we'll deal with that. But it was nice to have a work conversation every now and then to ground ourselves, to be back as a team. This is what we do. But we were so good at just dropping everything, prioritizing differently, and being slightly open, slightly vulnerable, slightly, I don't know. It was difficult. It really was. But I was amazed at how the team rallied around each other, put their arms around each other physically and virtually, and supported each other through what was to be a very difficult time afterwards. Um, but I think if we hadn't started that groundwork, I do wonder how we would have coped differently. We already knew how to have a conversation. We'd already started talking to each other. And up to that point, a lot of our conversations were about sport and books and things. But every now and then, because we'd had those private moments, I think that's why this worked. And I didn't do it to prepare us for this, but I can't help but think that if we hadn't done that work, if we didn't build ourselves as a team, have that vulnerability, I don't think we'd have got through it in quite the same way as we did. I'm
Mm.
desperately sad moment. I'm very proud of the team for how they coped. And, a few days later, they were all checking in. I would check in with them, but they were building up this little resilient team to say, okay, we've got this, we've got each other. They got back into work. They picked themselves up and carried on. But we didn't forget. We didn't just park it, compartmentalize it in that good sort of stereotypical way. It's like, you know what, we need to keep this on the table. We need to remember what this means. It was amazing to watch them as a group. I was immensely proud as much as I was desperately sad. Um, but it just shows that if we hadn't started the conversations before, if we hadn't been able to talk to each other, if we hadn't really understood the value of talking and connecting, I don't know how we'd have dealt with it. So whilst it was a really sad situation, I learned a lot from it about myself and how do I cope with things like that, but how do we as a team cope? And that's the sort of thing I'd want to bring into organizations. That's what I want to share today is for that small piece of work with your teams, your colleagues, your friends at home, spend the time with those conversations. Doesn't have to be big and vulnerable. Doesn't have to be the grand kind of reveal of here's my life and it's a mess and what do we do about it? But just knowing you can talk to somebody, then the day it matters, I can phone you up, Chris, and say, Chris, I need help. And I know I could because we've got that open conversation. It was a learning experience, that's for sure.
Yeah. I'm just listening to you talk, Jamie, and thank you for that. And thank you for that, that openness and honesty. I'm kind of struck by a word that keeps coming up, and this is unscripted and unrehearsed, right? Completely. The word that keeps coming up is the word team.
Mm.
And it makes me think actually, one of the really powerful things we have available is that being a member of a team, being part of a team, building teams. And teams are different. They serve and offer a different sort of power from the other support structures that we have. Friends and family are brilliant and wonderful for those of us that have access and are close to them. But friends and family are also, there's a reciprocal responsibility that kind of goes, there are some things you can't get into, or often quite a lot of stress, is because of friends and family, to be blunt, right?
Yeah.
So there's something really powerful about having a team. Now, I know I get it from networks that I'm part of, where I have a closeness to individuals, but they're not necessarily friends. They're sort of acquaintances who know me well, who collectively we form this idea of, it's the difference between a team for me and a group, right? You can be a group of people that work together, or you can be a team. It's that having that slightly more distant but close relationship, if that's not a contradiction in terms, can be really powerful and really helpful if we can foster that. And I think back to that group in the Northwest I was talking about with their cakes and stuff. There's no doubt in my mind that they truly epitomized what being a team was. Weren't necessarily all friends. In fact, I know some of them really didn't get on with one another. I'm not even sure
No.
that some of the cakes weren't poisoned at times, right? but it's super powerful, I think. Yeah.
But I think that's the point is, I left the organization. I'm working somewhere else now and doing other things. I'm in touch with a few people, not many. You're right. They're not close friends, but we had a trust in each other as a group. We knew how to look after each other and we knew to support each other. And it's interesting you talk about the team. I didn't phone my family. I didn't phone, my parents or my brother and have a chat. I did speak to my colleagues at work, and yeah, you're right. They're an important group around me. That team, that network. That's who rallied around. That's who gave us support and strength.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think, it is, so, maybe one of the messages here, is whether it's having a laugh around some cakes and some, or
Yep.
whatever it might be, or whether it's actually really coming together at a time of real need. Our workplaces offer a really special opportunity for
Yeah.
those of us that can use them to develop this sort of connection.
Yeah.
And it's a tragic shame that it happens so rarely. Yeah. So I mean, Jamie, any thoughts or any advice on learning you take away from that for people that might say, oh, okay, what could we do? What do we need to do to get started?
I think it plays back to the what works well bit we talked about earlier about just taking time to get to know the people around you at work. That, you don't have to be best buddies, but you are a team. You are going to work together and support each other. Particularly from my view as a leader and a manager, where I have a responsibility for the people that I work with, that I take that very seriously. But it's not about being a psychologist. It's not about sitting down on a couch and saying, oh, here's my problems. Actually, it's just getting to know people, spending a few minutes. It could be on Teams and Zoom. I personally prefer being in person and spending time, together, but it can work on Teams and Zoom for those who work in those environments. But it's just taking the time to humanize it. When you start a meeting, you don't start with, right, the agenda for today, here's project X, Y, and Z. It's like, how are you, Chris? You all right today? How are we as a team? Anything, how's the weekend? And just remembering we're humans first. And I think all it takes is a few minutes at every meeting to just whiz around the room. I reflect on something you told me a little while ago about the one-word check-in or a three-word check-in. But I'll let you tell that story in a second. But it's just going around the room saying, how's everyone today? Are we feeling all right? What's going on? You're looking a bit sad. Anything you want to share? It's not being a counselor. It's not being anything. It's just humanizing what we do. That way, the day that it matters, the day that it counts, the day you need it, it works.
Yeah.
And
It's
it
there
is
and it's
that
ready.
really.
Yeah.
Just spend time investing in people as people, not just someone who's delivering a project and we can just not worry about the rest. We're all people at the end of the day.
And I think critically is also, it's not just insurance against that contingency for when things go tragically wrong. Actually, the process of building that resilience and that robustness is a lot of fun in itself, right? It opens things up. And actually, I'll kind of expand on that. You talked about the check-in. This is a technique that is used in some of the men's groups and some of the contexts that I've worked in. Real simple process. It can be done in almost any. It can be easily done in a work context. And essentially, what we do is when we come together as a group, we pause and just invite a one-word or a three-word check-in from each individual in the group, right? you'll roll around the group. So I might say, okay, well, I'm checking in with irritation, frustration, and anticipation, right? And then leave it at that, right? It doesn't need any expansion. It doesn't need any justification. It doesn't need anything else. Just it's 3 words, but it's setting a bar that just says, look, this is where I'm at. You can expand if you want to. You can. Other people might say, look, do you want to? Is there something you want to talk about? Need to talk about? There's no compulsion.
Yeah.
Just know I'm effing irritated right now. Don't have to explain why, but I am, and that's what you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
And it can be really powerful, right? It's just a roll around a group as you've come together. Just say, let's do 1 word or 3 word check-in at the start of a day, the start of a meeting. Boom, boom, boom. This is where I'm at. This is where I'm at. This is where I'm at. Right? A really, really simple. It's low risk, low.
Yeah.
But just a way of connecting with being human first before we become the automaton that we are required to be in so much of our working lives. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
I've also seen the same thing done on the exit of a meeting in terms of what we're checking out with. Like I say, that's way more loaded, right? It can be powerful, but it can be way more loaded, right? But the check-in is what are we bringing in, right? Not which is more about where are we as people, and it's really risk-free, right?
Yeah. No,
or very low risk. Let me put it that way.
No, it's good. Like you said, it's a way of humanizing everything we do.
Yeah.
And it's very much a takeaway for me from this chat is remember we're all humans at the end of the day. Look after each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. I'm going to jump back into this. There's a couple more slides that we just kind of wanted to share, right? This isn't intended to be this is what you must look out for. That's not the point, the purpose of this slide at all. It's really just to reflect on the fact that there are ways we can spot people shifting away from where they normally are and potentially starting to be on a journey that means that they need some support, right? The only chance we've got of being able to see that and spot that is if we are connected in a routine, normal way, right? If we're doing the check-ins, if we're talking about things outside of the immediacy of the work question, right? And if we do have that connection, we've got a much, I think some of this stuff will automatically happens and we're able to spot the signs. And that's so actually really in sort of talking through this webinar, I discovered this organization, Mates in Mind. Honestly, folks, go look at it. It's phenomenal. I can't speak highly enough. It was new to me when I found them, but wow, what a phenomenal rich resource it is, right? One of the things that they include is how do you start a conversation, right? Because that can be a challenge. You think somebody's being a bit strange, a little bit concerned. It takes some courage to step up and sort of engage, and then engaging in the right way is critical. We all know stuff, hopefully, everybody's been exposed to how to be an open listener and stuff. But a couple of things that they added to this, which aren't on the slide, which really stood out for me, was don't try to fix, right? Especially being men and being engineers, we get that Mr. Fix-It squared kind of approach. We just want to sort it out, right? And we don't feel that a contribution is meaningful unless we've solved a problem. Well, actually, don't try and fix it. We're not experts. We're not skilled at this. We're not, just be human. Be human and be there to be able to listen. Allow people to voice what's happening for them, and then potentially encourage them to go and find support from places that are actually equipped and skilled and have expertise in how to do that, right? We're not there to fix. We're just there to be kind of a receptacle and a relay, potentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And why I like these slides, Chris, where you're right, we're not here to tell people how to actively listen or to how to spot the signs. We're talking about the power of connection and talking. What I liked about the team and reflecting back is I knew who the noisy ones were. I knew who the quiet ones were. So I could spot changes in behavior, for quiet ones talking quite a lot. And there's that sort of nervous, anxious point to it. Or is the noisy one suddenly not saying a word? It's like, okay, something's not quite right. Yeah. It was the signs that thought, okay, I need to step in. Then these sorts of tools come in of where are we in this journey and how do we do it? That's a different skill. But at least by being connected, by having previous conversations, we could at least recognize the signs to get to these slides.
Yeah.
It's really important.
And then kind of this next slide, for me, this is a really important message, which we always forget when we're having these sorts of conversations, right? I call this, it's the put on your oxygen mask first before trying to help others slide, right? I guess my appeal to everybody in the audience is look after yourself first, not last, right? Because it's only by being in a good place yourself that you can actually in any way meaningfully support somebody else that might be going through struggle or challenge. And particularly if you're in the process of supporting somebody with struggle or challenge, that's a burden. And you need to take care of yourself in taking on that burden. It's such an important thing, especially for people that are involved in caring and what have you. As a carer, as somebody who's taking care of yourself, call out for help too, right? You can still be cared for while you're caring for others. And I think for some reason we lose that. Oh, so maybe I'm just talking from my own kind of weird, goofy psychology and experience, but I think we lose sight of that sometimes. That in order to care for somebody else, you need to be cared for, and it has to be reciprocal, and it's not truly generous unless you let other people look after you too.
Yeah.
And then I think, so we just wanted to get on, the obvious thing. Where do you go? For anybody that's listening to this subsequently or on the call saying, what do we do next? Where can I go? There's a few things up there. There's all sorts of resources available. One thing I just want to shout out, a number of those, particularly the ones along the bottom, are very much around when it's a crisis. When it's a crisis, when it's hit crunch point, there are places to go for immediate support to try and help in the crisis. But I think, Jamie, you've given such a powerful example of we can avoid some of those crises or be in a much better place to deal with them when they happen by actually being a little bit preemptive, and really want to call out Mates in Mind, and particularly Andy's Man Club. Andy's Man Club, I've been to a couple of their meetings, are a phenomenal organization. Every Monday at 7 p.m. at over 270 places in the UK, a group of men get together who may not ever have met each other before, and they sit down and they're just available to talk to one another. It's one of the most powerful things you will ever do, one of the most empowering things you will ever do, to just go and do that. By all means, if you're in need and in crisis, phenomenal place to go for support. But if you feel a calling here, if this is like, actually, I'd really like to do something here. I'd like to be part of a group. I'd like to help other people and be part of a group that can help me if I need it. Andy's Man Club, there will be one near you. I think, find them on all the social media places. You'll be able to find on Facebook or wherever where the closest one to you is. They're open, no fee, no anything, right? 7 o'clock every Monday. And there's a group of men waiting, wanting to talk. So, big shout out to that. So, those resources are there for those that want them. So the final bit, I guess, the final wrap up, I hope it's been helpful for people. We've got a couple of other webinars planned for the rest of the year. One on International Men's Day, the 19th of November, around male role models, and probably going to explore a little bit more around what rather than toxic and stereotypical masculinity, what does positive masculinity look like? How do we know it? How do we recognize it? How do we acknowledge it? For those of us that feel the need and the calling, how do we live it? Right? And then there's a plan to do something around why might you create a men's network in your community, in your workplace, and how might you go about doing that as well? So that we're thinking about running. Jamie, any final thoughts from you?
No, not at this stage, Chris. I think it's been an interesting discussion. We talk about mental health in all our conversations. We've had some really good ones through the year. And the power of role modeling it adds a lot of value from both a mental health and just good behaviors. So I'm looking forward to doing that one later in the year. But no, thank you for taking the time to share some of that with me today, Chris, and allowing me to talk about what I've been through. And again, I can't stress enough the power of just being human, looking out for each other as friends and colleagues in the way that you and I would, and the people we work with. If we remember we're human at the end of the day, we've made one step towards doing better.
Great. So, well, Jamie, thank you so much for your openness and your willingness to talk on that subject. And everybody else, we Jamie and I and the rest of the network, we're available on the Equal Engineers platforms, on Circle. Follow us. We welcome all kind of thoughts, contributions. I don't see any chat or Q&A, so unless there's anything anybody wants to raise, I suggest we call an end to the webinar. Thank everybody for attending, and thank those people who are watching this on the recording as well. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Cheers then.